You're going to really enjoy this week's guest, Mike Bonfiglio, documentary producer and director, who is the co-director of HBO's new two-part documentary on the life of Mel Brooks, the 99-year-old man. Mike Bonfiglio has also directed or produced movies about talents such as Patrice O'Neill, Ricky Velez, Charles Schultz. He was involved with the recent Netflix documentary about the New Yorker, and he's worked several times with Judd Apatow. Michael and I actually met in 1999, when he was working for Joe Berlinger, who was the director of the Blair Witch Project Part 2, and I was working on the editorial crew. I was one of the assistant film editors, and Michael and I worked together for, 6 months, 8 months, something like that. And so I'm absolutely thrilled to see, what has developed in the years since we worked together. I mean, he's had such a great career, been involved with so many interesting people, cool projects, and now Mel Brooks, holy crap. I mean, he's like Mount Rushmore of popular entertainers. Thrilled to talk to Michael about this movie, which is great and features like so much killer footage of Mel Brooks that you've never seen before. So anyway, this is a treat. I'm really blessed to have Michael here and to know him. He's a swell guy. You're really going to appreciate this. So dig in. So you came up with Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky. And then subsequently, you've become a producer and a director of documentaries yourself. And, just looking at what you've done, particularly in the world of comedy, you've done so many different kinds of shows, like the Patrice O'Neill thing, the David Letterman series, the Jerry Seinfeld show, and as well as things that are maybe more seeped in archival footage, like the Carlin documentary and now the Mel Brooks documentary. When you had that documentary training, did you have a thought that you wanted to do that, but with comedy?
Not at all. Yeah. Not at all. It was like my sort of documentary filmmaking upbringing was, did I ever tell you the story of how I linked up with Joe and Bruce?
No.
So their first film, Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, their first film, Brother's Keeper, which is still to this day my all-time favorite documentary. I grew up which if people don't know, that it's about these four brothers who lived in central New York State on a farm who they lived like it was the 1800s, like no electricity, running water, that kind of thing. Eccentric guys. They're older guys. One of the brothers dies, and another of the brothers is accused of his murder. And the town, it's a small town called Munnsville, New York. The people of the town rallied around the accused guy and paid for his defense. And it's this kind of beautiful story of community and outcasts, and it's a great movie, like wrapped in a narrative of a true crime kind of a film. It's great. Anyway, that movie was filmed and the real case took place like 15 minutes from where I grew up. I grew up in a really small town, central New York. And I was, as a kid, obsessed with film and like super interested in those kinds of things. I wanted to be a filmmaker, but, I lived in the middle of nowhere. We didn't get anything that was outside the mainstream, anything like that. And so Brother's Keeper, when that came out, it was self-distributed by Berlinger and Sinofsky. And so they knew there would be local interest, and they played it at a local cinema. So it was like, oh, here's this movie that's, it's outside of the mainstream. It's like, I'd seen it was on Siskel and Ebert. It was like this indie doc, and it was playing in my town. So I went, not my town, but a couple towns over. So I went to go see it, and Bruce was introducing it that night. It was like, my first time seeing a real live filmmaker, like a guy who did the thing that I wanted to do. Even though at the time I wasn't so interested in documentary, Brother's Keeper really like introduced me to the documentary form in a way that I had been unfamiliar with. Long story short, I was 15 years old. I went up to Bruce after the screening and was like, I want to be a filmmaker and da da da. And like, and he was super, super nice to me, which was the thing. He was really, really nice to me. And he came back like a couple of weeks later and showed it again. And so I remember like I cut school. I was in high school. I cut school, took a bus, went down and saw it again, met him again, talked to him again. He was again really, really nice to me and said, I was like, it's my dream to like go to NYU and be a filmmaker. And he was like, well, if you've at the time I'm like a sophomore in high school. And he was like, if you ever make it to New York, look me up. I'm in the phone book. So cut to a few years later, graduate high school. I moved to Brazil for a year. I come back. I get into NYU film school. And my freshman year, their film Paradise Lost came out. And it was playing at MoMA at New Directors. And so I went, and I was so naive. I thought you could just like walk in and like buy a ticket at the, New Directors. Like it was sold out for weeks. But I'm at the box office, it's sold out. So I was just kind of wandering around and I saw Bruce Sinofsky again. And so I went up to him. At this point, I'm 19 and was like, hi, I met you a few years ago. He pretended to remember me. To the day he died, he claimed that he actually did remember me, but I'm certain that he didn't. He was just being nice. And he was like, are you coming to the movie? I was like, no, it's sold out. I don't have a ticket. He was like, oh, here, I've got a ticket for you. And he gave me a ticket. He introduced me to Joe. Joe was really, really nice. Went to saw the movie, totally blown away by Paradise Lost, and talked to them after. And I was like, can I work for you for free? Like, you don't have to pay. And they were like, yes, absolutely. Because they were about to launch their self-distribution of that film. So that was how I got in with them, and I started, my first jobs were cleaning film prints and answering phones and taking out the trash and just whatever was needed in their little office. And so they were like my mentors. And that office that we, when you and I worked together on Blair Witch 2 many, years later, that was where their office was. So I worked there for a number of years and kind of worked my way up to ultimately producing for those guys and then kind of branching out on my own.
Well,
so it was a really long answer to a short question.
It's actually super helpful, but because now that you're saying that, I remember when we worked together, the assistant editor on the movie, Tina Pacheco, and one of the assistants, Sean Nuzzo, were huge fans of Freaks and Geeks because it was on.
It was on.
So we actually worked together in '99 because I think that's when the show aired, because Blair Witch might have come out, whatever it is. There might have been an overlap.
It was overlap, yeah.
You guys were talking about Freaks and Geeks.
Yes.
And I remember there was like the buzz that you guys were like, no, dude. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a show on TV. Like, I'm not watching a show on Channel 4 or whatever it was, and so but it wasn't until years later that, Freaks and Geeks became, a touchstone of not only a great episode, like a season of television, but everyone involved with it ended up being part of the next comedy wave. But I always, it's so funny to me that you ended up working with Apatow, because you and Tina are the original Apatow people in my head.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, no, I remember like you'd tape it off TV and trade VHSs because like you couldn't find the show. It was, pre-streaming and whatever. Yeah, that's so funny. And yeah, no, I was an Apatow fan since like the Ben Stiller show. Yeah. And got the chance to work with him. I was directing on this series called Iconoclasts for, and actually it was an episode that Joe Berlinger was supposed to direct, and then he had to go and do something else and couldn't do it and called me. And so Joe was responsible for that as well. But it was an episode of the show called Iconoclasts for Sundance Channel. Mm-hmm. And it was a show that it was on for quite a few years. It was a fun show. It was pretty cool. They would take like two people usually from kind of different disciplines in the arts or culture or business or whatever, famous people, athletes, whatever, and put them together. Sometimes they knew each other before, sometimes they didn't. I had worked on it as a producer and as a story editor, and ended up directing a couple episodes in the final season of it. And it was an episode with Judd and Lena Dunham at the time that Girls was just about to launch. And that's where I met Judd. And we, he was the subject, I was the director, and we just really got along. And I was already a fan of his, but he was just great and really cool, and we had a lot of things in common, and he really liked what I did with the show, and afterward called me up and was like, let's find something to do together. I'm really interested in documentary. I love documentary, and would like to, let's find something. And so we talked about a few ideas, and then he called me one day in 26 no what year was it? It was 2013. In 2013, it's over 10 years ago, and said, I was talking to Rick Rubin, and the Avett brothers are about to go into the studio, and if we want, we can go and film with them. And he was like, I'll pay for it. Let's just do it as a spec. We had talked about maybe like creating some kind of a series where we would be like following artists in the creative process. And so we started making this film about the Avett brothers, which we didn't know was going to be a feature documentary. It was just kind of an exploratory thing. And that ended up being a movie, and called May It Last, that came out in 2017. And then in the interim, we did a 30 for 30 together. So it just kind of started this partnership, and we started making stuff together, and we had fun. We enjoyed each other, and the stuff we made, we were proud of. So it was like, let's keep making stuff,
Yeah. So when you come around to you tackle someone like Carlin,
Mhm.
who for us Gen Xers is touchstone guy,
The guy, yeah.
The guy. And then also an interesting sort of case in not only the trajectory of his career in American comedy. I mean, you're talking about a guy coming from the early 60s when books were still banned. You couldn't have language in certain books to the mid 70s, where you have like Deep Throat being like advertised in the New York Times. I mean, there's like, it's a huge cultural shift. So there's that's interesting about him. But then he sort of changed a bit as he got older. And since he's been dead, his material has been co-opted by different factions who claim ownership. So that sort of created another narrative, like sort of posthumous life to the material that you were using. This time, you're also going to Mount Rushmore. Okay, here's Mel. Mel's still with us. There's nobody really. I mean, we could sit here and like ponder who else would be on that Mount Rushmore, but I mean, he's
unquestionably.
Yeah, he's there.
You're not going to get an argument. Yeah.
How it's a two-part documentary.
Yes.
But how do you tackle trying to string together a narrative when you, in this case, have so much archival material to choose from? I mean, sometimes documentarians, you feel like, they kind of have to vamp because of material that they don't have.
Right.
Like, but if you see the Ben Stiller documentary about his parents, you're like, oh my God, the parents left this trove of audio and visual material for him to use. In the case of Brooks, the amount of talk show appearances that you've unearthed, that even as a Mel Brooks fan and somebody who scrolls around YouTube looking for old Mel Brooks, I mean, there's stuff I've never seen before. Yeah. How do you negotiate the volume and then also the tone? Like, what if you saw like Mel tell the same or a similar kind of story? How do you choose the one that you want, even though you're like, well, there's those other two that were really good, we just didn't have the room for it?
Yeah, it's a process, I mean, with Mel, he's on a million talk shows over decades, but I think one of the sort of fortunate things in terms of like just weeding through all that stuff, which it's not like I'm sitting there alone doing that. It's like, we have it, but the editor of this film, Joe Beshenkovsky, is amazing. He also edited our Carlin film. He edited Judd's Gary Shandling film. Joe's incredible, and he's kind of like the first weeder through, but we all get like sort of a system set up that it's almost like our own personal YouTube of just all the stuff that's coming in. And so, the research and archival team pull stuff in from all over the world. And then we all kind of go through it. But I think, because Mel does have the tendency over the years to just tell a lot of the same stories and
Sure.
perfect them and, change them and embellish them. And so one thing that as I was going through stuff was always kind of keeping an ear to what's something different? Where's a place where he's talking about something that I haven't heard him talk about before? Where is he? Because he's also a person who I think, especially when he's, on television, talk shows and things, he's performing as Mel Brooks in a way.
And he's jacked. He's totally jacked.
Totally. And that is him. Like it really is him.
Yeah.
But there's a performance element to it, and you don't really see him off of that. So I was always kind of trying to keep my eyes and ears open for things that felt like, oh, this is a little different. This feels a little less performy. This feels a little bit more candid and polished, And so with Mel, because he was famous and successful all over the world, he did talk shows in other countries, and so that's I think one of the joys of this film.
Totally.
Is you get to see him on these talk shows in Denmark and the UK and Holland, and where he kind of sometimes has a little bit of a different gear.
Yep.
And I don't know if that's because when he's going on Johnny Carson, it's everybody in America is watching this, and it's the biggest platform. And if maybe he's doing some, talk show in Holland, it feels like almost people aren't watching or something. I don't know.
Or that he's dealing with a different audience.
Exactly.
I remember one time
Absolutely.
seeing, on YouTube, a performance of Jerry Lewis in Stockholm in 1972, and his whole tenor of the way he's dealing with that audience is very different than the way he would deal with an audience in Vegas or in Miami Beach or something like that. He could almost afford to be a little more serious, downplay it a little bit with a foreign audience who wasn't expecting the, ta-da, Mel Brooks coming out to you. There's so many things about, since I've seen the documentary, there's so many things that have been fermenting in my mind about the American comedy century. Everything about Mel Brooks and his era of comedy is big and loud and sweaty and performing to the last row.
Yeah.
And he's also panicky and desperate. So it's the same thing that, and he's a ham. So it's almost the same quality that Martin Short has. He'll do anything to get you to laugh. If it's drinking the thing and the water coming down or pulling his pants down, he'll just do it, right? It was big.
And he's generally not looking for a little ha-ha laugh. He's looking for the biggest, most explosive, bring the house down kind of laugh. And to that comedic style, he loved, Chaplin and the Marx Brothers and the Ritz Brothers and the Three Stooges. And even though within that there's a range of comedic styles, but Borscht Belt stuff, I mean, that's where he grew up and cut his teeth. And it's there's not a whole lot of subtlety there. It's big jokes, it's big laughs.
That's right.
And Mel loves that. There must have been something in the water in 1974, because that's the same year that Coppola did Godfather 2 in The Conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
What the fuck?
Yeah, it's so funny because I was I looked that up.
And Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein, same year.
It's what other directors have had that kind of year? And you're thinking, okay, it must be something back to the studio system where they were cranking out so many movies that maybe John Huston had two great movies in one year. Yeah. But that 74 for it to be okay, this is going to stand alone for Mel Brooks. And then you're yeah, but there's this guy Coppola who did pretty well that year. But to Mel Brooks's point, I mean, The Conversation was a little indie movie, and it had its fans, but I mean, Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles were international hits. What I find interesting is that critically, in the late 70s, early 80s, Woody Allen was considered to be sort of more, his early movies were just as silly and looking for big laughs as Mel Brooks movies were. But by the time he does Annie Hall, I mean, he won Best Picture for Annie Hall.
Yeah.
And I would disagree with Nick Kroll's assessment that Mel Brooks was cooler than Woody Allen. I always felt in those years that Woody Allen was way cooler than Mel Brooks. There was nothing cool at all about Mel Brooks. What was cool about Mel Brooks is that his movies were dirty, and that they cursed. And as a little kid, that was exciting. But, Woody Allen was playing, jazz, Monday nights at Michael's. He seemed to be, before we learned more about Woody's life. Now we get to their end of their, and Mel Brooks, who is so unabashedly Jewish, and it's like in your face. He's like, I am Jew, hear me roar, right? But I always found there was more anti-Semitism even before Woody Allen's personal life kind of unraveled and changed our thoughts about him. I always thought that he was always more of a victim of anti-Semitism than Mel was, because, well, first of all, Woody had a little bit of that self-hatred thing going.
Right.
But Mel Brooks's comedy was broad. I mean, let's face it, like Annie Hall, even if you loved it, it's only going to appeal, like, it's good.
For sure.
Right, like Blazing Saddles, I mean, you're hitting like, it's not only, it's Jewish humor, but it's hitting everybody.
Everybody.
And that to me is that like Woody Allen was not a populist filmmaker and Mel Brooks is a populist filmmaker. And it seems to be like, that is like the big characteristic difference.
I think that's the key. I think that's the key. I think if you took all of Woody Allen's entire oeuvre, the box office probably would not have been the same as just Blazing Saddles or just Young Frankenstein. I mean, I have no idea. That's totally unscientific. No, but I'm saying like Woody Allen, even probably biggest movie, Annie Hall, I guess. His biggest box office was like Broadway or something.
It might even be
something like
something random like that. Yeah.
Right, totally. But still not like, let's go eat popcorn to this movie all across America.
Nope.
Not
one of them. I mean, even Take the Money and Run, and the ones that were like,
they're like fun, silly,
appeal. I mean, like,
totally.
I mean, it's funny. I can think about like with him and Mel, it's like you kind of like put 12 chairs up against Love and Death because they're so infused with their
really interesting
Russian literature, and like joke for joke, Woody's kills. It does well, but you really have to know Russian literature to really, like Patton Oswalt says in your documentary, he's like, he went back and reread some of those guys and was like, oh, I'm kind of reconsidering 12 chairs. And didn't Mel Brooks always like 12 chairs himself?
Oh yeah. I think if you were, it's still like the movie that I think he's the most proud of.
Yeah.
And to this day, like nobody's seen it. And I always thought, there's nothing about this in the movie or anything, but just something that I we talked about internally, and I thought was kind of interesting is like, he does the producers, he does the 12 chairs, neither of which is successful.
Yep.
Then he does Blazing Saddles. He thinks he's never going to work again in the movies. Blazing Saddles goes for broke, massive hit. And from there, it's parodies. Yep. And like what, and I'm just like the thought experiment of like, what is the Mel Brooks career and output of movies if the 12 chairs is a hit? Do we see the Mel Brooks that we think of with Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein and Spaceballs and all the parody? I mean, he's so associated with movie parody.
Yes.
But he didn't start off doing movie parodies. He started off doing original stuff, and the producers is original, and then the 12 chairs based on a novel, but it's not movie parody. And then he doesn't really stop until Life Stinks is his only deviation from parody in his and so I don't know. It's just like, what happens if the 12 chairs is
that's interesting. That's almost like it would have been he would have become Woody Allen before Woody Allen in that way that Woody Allen became once
very possibly so.
Woody Allen was also really smart. He got guys like Gordon freaking Willis to shoot 7 of his movies in a row. I mean, like like Mel Brooks's movies aesthetically are not remarkable,
except for Young Frankenstein.
Yeah, and I don't even know if that's remarkable, but there's a fidelity there, and it's a handsome movie in a way that his other movies feel clunky and almost like because he talks about like, I'm a writer, I'm not really a director, and and I think the same thing is true for Woody. Woody just was like, oh no, I'm just going to get this guy to do all that stuff for me. And with Mel Brooks, you don't come out of Blazing Saddles being like, the DP was a little, like it just it's sort of secondary to why you're there. But one thing that Brooks says in the documentary, this is probably in the 70s, And I think this came through even when we were growing up. The idea of movie history and comedy aging well.
Hmm.
Okay, as opposed to like, he wasn't talking about Rudy Valentino or
Right.
or Errol Flynn later, but he's saying, yeah, we still talk about Chaplin, we talk about Buster Keaton.
Hmm.
Okay, the Ritz brothers, people don't about as much, although I'm so glad that you guys put it in there because for those guys, Harry Ritz was the guy.
Yeah.
Um, but Marx Brothers, everyone leading up to it. Nowadays, I find that when I have discussions with people about comedies, the first thing that is brought up is it doesn't hold up. It doesn't date well,
Mhm.
or no, or it's dated, or they'd never be able to make that today, which is really what you hear all the time with
Mhm.
Blazing Saddles.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not to say that those are incorrect, but that seems to run counter to what Mel Brooks was talking about 40 years ago with the idea of things aging well. I mean, we look at Blazing Saddles now, and there's, from a contemporary, standpoint, there's things about it that would not be permissible.
Mhm.
However, it wasn't permissible at the time either. I mean, the
Right.
movie's kind of a one-off, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
not like this
Yeah.
is the way it was done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, it's an interesting thing to think about, like, well, could you make that movie today? And we addressed that in our movie. I think you basically could. I mean, look at South Park, I mean, like the edginess of Blazing Saddles, um, for the time and for now, like it still is kind of like jarring, some of the jokes, but I think there's a sense that like the place that it's coming from is one of decency and righteousness.
Yes.
It's crude and crass and whatever, but you also have to remember, like, not just in terms of the racial things, but like, the campfire farting scene, like that was enormously groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And now, like, there's like
Groundbreaking.
farts in, yeah, there's like farts in TV commercials.
Right.
And I mean, if it had been like that before. I mean,
Right.
in Blazing Saddles, the character that Mel Brooks plays is Governor Lepedemain,
Yeah.
which is named after the French, the fartist, Lepedemain, who was also a favorite of George Carlin's, by the way. Um, like this stuff is not new, but culturally in the U.S., we're a pretty puritanical society and culture, and it was the early '70s. The Hays Code had been done. People were pushing different boundaries in film, across all genres, and yet at the same time, I don't know exactly what year it was, but All in the Family having a toilet flush was like enormous.
Yes.
Saying the word pregnant on TV was like, oh my God, So like, it's so difficult to put ourselves into the mindset of the time, given today's culture, where really anything goes almost anywhere. Like the FCC is kind of a quaint organization in terms of profanity, bleeping, and those kinds of things. And this was a big thing in when we made the George Carlin film, because that was a big part of his, the 7 words you can never say on television and that stuff. And it's so difficult, I think, for people who are under, say, 45-ish to even wrap their heads around, like, wait, why is this a problem? Why, really? Like, that was that taboo? That was that groundbreaking?
Right. Right.
It's extraordinary how massively the culture has shifted in regards to those kinds of ideas,
Yeah.
profanity or whatever.
Totally. And I think
While we're simultaneously still in a time of total speech oppression and book
yes.
banning and all kinds of things that
Yes.
are much scarier. But you can say, a politician can say fuck and nobody bats an eye,
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and we didn't ask Mel about this, but it is interesting to think about, like, how different that movie would be if it was Gig Young and Richard Pryor instead of Cleavon Little and Gene Wilder. And I wonder how much that casting affected what Mel was doing at the movie. I mean, there's my favorite scene in the movie is the great where Cleavon has just been completely racially insulted and attacked on the streets of Rock Ridge, and Gene Wilder is like, comforting him and says, you have to understand these are just people of the land, like, the common clay of the New West, morons. And Cleavon breaks and Mel leaves it in the movie. And it's this wonderfully warm, hilarious moment, but that's so human
Yes.
because he's really breaking, he cracks up and it's such a great moment. And I can't imagine that scene being the same with different casting. There's absolutely an argument to be made that I'm not quite sure where I stand on it, but like that Mel just being Mel is funnier than anything in any of his movies, and so that was one thing with this movie that we wanted to show was like it's not just the movies because in all honesty, the movies are a mixed bag, like there's some are better than others. There's some, but Mel is just this force of comedic nature,
Yes.
that is so funny and fascinating to watch. And there's a clip in our movie that he's on the Mike Douglas show in like the late 60s, like before he's really well known. It's like he's the 2,000-year-old man. It might be from the mid 60s. It's in black and white. And it's a panel, and it's Dr. Joyce Brothers and someone else who I can't remember. And Mike Douglas is asking Dr. Joyce Brothers questions, and Mel just keeps interrupting and jumping in.
Yeah.
And it starts off funny, and then it's like, oh, this guy's kind of an asshole. And then he keeps doing, and then it's funny again. And it's like, and he can't, but you see this like irrepressible force that he cannot stop himself. It's the reason Max Liebman, who was the producer of your show of shows, called him a living interruption. That he would, and he's just this incredible energy that like you could see a scenario where you're like, get this guy out of here. He's too much. Like he's got to shut up.
Yes.
And then, but you love him. And so, and I don't know if it's a thing of just the nostalgia factor of, we also know that he, by the time you or I had any idea who Mel Brooks was, he was already kind of old.
Yeah.
And so like,
it's not like he was Steve Martin. It's not like he's a guy that was like, oh yeah, Eddie Murphy comes out, we're like, holy shit, rock star.
Right.
Yeah.
Mel was never that. Mel was kind of like this older guy. Always in my knowing of him. And it's funny, like even there's a very brief clip in our movie of his very first appearance on television. He was in one sketch on the Milton Berle show,
right?
And he's a kid, but even then he still kind of looks a little bit old, and he's like probably 23 years old or something like that.
What did Wilford Brimley look like at 23, right?
Right, exactly. And there's that thing for sure, like you watch old movies and you're like, oh, geez, how old is the lead here? Like he looks like he's, 50 and he's 28,
Yes.
But there is that thing. But I think also with Mel, it's like he was never trying to, well, I mean, maybe you can make the argument with like the Hitler rap, but like other than that, like, I mean, it never felt like he was reaching to like appeal to the younger generation. It was like, I'm doing vaudeville Borscht Belt shit.
Yeah.
And I'm doing it so well and so unabashedly and shamelessly.
Yes.
That like he's never pandering in even though he's reaching for the laughs as hard as he possibly can. He's not trying to be cool or hip. He's just being Mel.
That's right.
And that's kind of rare,
Yeah, that's interesting. That is interesting because especially for comedy, things I mean, yeah, he made Spaceballs. Okay, so but like you said, that's another parody, and he's like, okay, I'm just going to use my parody lens to do science fiction movies now, right? It's the same thing as westerns.
This is exactly. This is the genre that's
exactly
that's popular now.
Mike, this was awesome, dude. We could talk for so long. The one thing I just sort of feel remiss that I'm really sorry that we didn't get to was.
Well, let's get to it. I got a couple extra minutes if you want.
Like just his marriage to Anne Bancroft. First of all, I thought the marriage to his first wife was really sympathetically rendered as well. And the two sons that were on camera, I thought were so honest and
Yeah.
really sweet. And um, they weren't like it. It was clear once Mel Brooks got remarried and moved to California and had this huge success. It wasn't even, they didn't even, Nick didn't say, oh, he became a jerk. He just said, no, he wasn't in the fabric of our daily, weekly lives. Previously, even after the divorce, he'd stop by after school and spend a couple of hours with those kids. And so you feel the difficult years were long years. Those were a lot of years,
Yeah.
between your show of shows and Get Smart, and although he was having certain successes, he was Mr. Anne Bancroft, you
Right.
know. Uh,
There's a headline in the movie that when they got married, it says Anne Bancroft weds writer. Mel's name is not in the headline because people don't
totally.
know his name. Anne
Yeah.
Bancroft weds writer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like those two, the way they look at each other, the way that
Yes.
both of them looked at each other was, well, you couldn't fake it, right? I mean, like the adoration was really
Absolutely.
there.
It's really, I mean, it's so palpable, and we have clips of them talking about one another and together, and up until they did a little arc on Curb Your Enthusiasm,
Yes.
the season that Larry was in the producers, and we got the outtakes of a scene of them together that you see in the movie, and it's not long, but you see them really being together. And it's just so sweet and real and moving. And it's like these two people are absolutely in love with each other, and they are soulmates and life partners. And relationship goals or whatever, it's they have such a beautiful love. And that sort of keeps going because Mel to this day really has a very hard time talking about Anne. Like he can't really do it. He immediately it's palpable. He just gets emotional and overcome in talking about her. So you don't see a whole lot of interviews after Anne passed of Mel talking about her at all because I think it's just too hard for him still.
Too devastating.
Yeah.
And how could it not be?
And he could have hung it up. I mean, his last movie was Dracula Dead and Loving It, which I'm sure has its fans, but it's not a major work. And he made plenty of money and had I'm sure a nice life, but did this incredible Broadway show, which is really his first love, is the live performance, like
Totally.
and
Well, even that part where you show him as a kid that he was a drummer, and you
yeah,
have this
yeah.
footage of him keeping time in
Mhm.
like from the mid 70s, and you're like,
Mhm.
holy shit, this fucking guy.
He
No
was the
wonder
legit drummer. Yeah.
Like he's
Yeah.
like this fabulous rhythm guy, and
Mhm.
he's got that motor that never really stops himself.
Yeah. It makes so much sense that he was a drummer.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Michael, this is awesome.
Yeah, it was so great to talk about this.
Thank you again to Michael Bonfiglio. Amazing chat. The 99-Year-Old Man, the two-parter is on HBO. Check it out when you can. You won't be sorry. For Mel Brooks fans or people who don't even really know him, this is what you need to see. Thank you again so much for dropping by today, to the man in the blue bathrobe for providing the tunes, and my boy John Partham for making sure everything sounds better than bad. All right, y'all. Be well. This is your boy AB.